we begin with the context of Chinese migration to Southeast Asia in the 19th century. The earth deity, better known as Da Po Gong, alias Tua Pe Gong, had been charged with protecting devotees from all sorts of harms, which included disease, illnesses, and most importantly for our case study, tigers in 19th century Singapore. Colonial records indicate an ever-growing threat to the development of Singapore, one exacerbated by Chinese laborers who were indentured to clear the forests that once covered the interior of Singapore. These Chinese laborers, however, were not oblivious to these threats, as they tried to negotiate and placate what they believed to be a disorderly force through the worship of the earth deity.
So it's kind of interesting because Datok Gong means different thing to different people, right? Okay. And if you go to different places in Singapore where there is the worship of Datok Gong, they only can say, okay, Datok Gong is this deity of this particular space. Right? So it can be a stone, it can be a tree. But in the recent times, you see some people even go to the extent to make a statue, right? Like Kim Sin, to put down there. And of course, they make the statue looks more like a Malay man, because the Chinese believe that Datuk Gong is actually like a earth deity or a Tuti Gong of the Malay. It's always Chinese and something within the local. Because Chinese always consider ourselves that we are not visitors, we are kind of visitors. So in a way, we adopt and pay respect to the local deities.
Okay. Is there any reason why this Datuk Gong is always referred to as a male figure?
Okay, so the thing is this, there's a difference between Topik Gong, Tuti Gong, and Datuk Gong, right? Tuti Gong basically in Chinese very simple, right? Is Tuti, is the deity of the earth. Topik Gong is an honorific name, right? Datuk Gong. So if you know, you follow the way the Chinese call each other, the uncles, so the eldest uncle, right? I think the nephew's children would call the eldest uncle as, right? The nephew would call Da Pe, right? Tua Pe, right? And then the children would call Topik Gong. Yeah. Right? So Topik Gong is an honorific name. But we call this Topik Gong, but we do not know whether this Topik Gong is Tuti Gong or something.
There are two phenomena which remain especially relevant to our discussion. Firstly, there was en masse migration of Chinese laborers from southern China to Singapore since 1819. It meant that the bulk of Chinese coolies and workers were impoverished as they were trapped in a labor ticket system. This forced them into confrontation with the tigers that roamed the jungles of Singapore.
我跟你讲，算是拿豆或者是背供哦，照老辈人讲啊，蛇跟老虎是他们管的。
In the case of Tua Pe Gong in Balestier, the construction of the temple was lobbied by Hokkien sugarcane plantation coolies who worked under Joseph Balestier since 1834. In Pulau Ubin, there is also the presence of tiger attacks. It is related to the Chinese community, where it is now home to many Tua Pe Gong temples. These phenomena, as described, have dovetailed together to sow the seeds of the deity's popularity on the island. The maritime migration of southern Chinese to Singapore was a trend that was fueled by the global economy's hunger for cash crops in the 19th century. This can be seen through the evidence of gambia, pepper, and sugarcane plantations, which were being exported to the rest of the world at that point in time. Gambia was being exported to China as early as 1836. Xia Yuqin was one of the prime examples of individuals, as he was known as the King of Gambia, where he owned huge plantations in Upper Thomson Road, Sembawang and Mandai, as well as a well-known trading house along the Singapore River.
Moving on to the theme of gender, we have raised the question, why is Tua Pe Gong constantly represented as a male? While we cannot draw direct relationships, there is a clear instance of gender representation of the divine in Singapore, as they were by and large male and of the lower working classes. Therefore, in the earlier stages of Chinese migration from the 19th century up to the 1870s, this phenomena played a role in Tua Pe Gong being mostly male.
A clear instance of intermingling religious practices between the races can be observed in the instance of the Keramat on Kusu Island, where the worship of Tian Gong, a characteristically Chinese deity, was prioritized ahead of the Datok. Syncretism in these cases a borrowing of different cultural elements associated with Chinese and Malay Islamic practices are definitely prevalent. An analysis of the Datuk Gong phenomenon through the lens of race gives us an insight into the social, cultural, historical context that these deities were conceptualized in. Much more importantly, we wish to affirm the earlier findings of Dr. Cheok Tong, who noted that worship of Datuk Gong can be traced to individuals of Creole descent. At least 2 temples in Singapore are paying homage to Datuk Gong, with their deities being manifested and installed by Creole personalities.
Hing Ong Huala! Hing Ong Huala!
There is also a fusion of Islamic and Chinese traditions, whereby the reality observed was much more murky. The concept of avoiding pork marks a clear stratification vis-a-vis that of other Chinese deities, as Datuk Gong was given a sacred place, but in a very peripheral manner, since it was subsumed to a very token position in temples. 金山寺, for example, it was placed almost there for the sake of being there. Goso Tua Gong offers a similar insight, where pork was openly offered to the resident Datuk Gong, since this was a practice much earlier on. In other words, the resident Malay Muslim entity was sidelined and forgotten.
As noted in the core of our arguments, the worship of the earth deity was brought to Singapore courtesy of the maritime routes that brought migrants to Southeast Asia from China. What is forgotten is the popularity of Tua Pek Kong in Singapore, which is easily represented in the manifestation in Wan Fu San Fu De Zi, which tells us that Tua Pek Kong was originally honoured in the form of a written tablet with his name, and it was only much later on that the deity was represented in the form of an image. This image, according to the books published by the temple, can be traced back to the need to represent the deity's role with regards to the Cantonese and Seyap brickmakers who formed the bulk of the temple devotees' base. The deity, in the form of a clay figure, was constructed in a mirror image-like manner, where earth in the form of clay was amalgamated with the waters of Kallang River, before it was refined in the fires of a kiln that made bricks. The representation of the deity thus mirrored the occupational needs of its patrons. On a similar note, with the case of Ubin, we have the representation of the deity taking the form of granite quarried from the island where there used to be a granite quarries as early as 1851. What investigators have forgotten to mention, with reference from an environmental history slant, was the ease and portability of deity's representation, which was a product of local resources available at the devotee's disposal. We can see that the case of animism hasn't diminished over time as well, as ephemeral and semi-permanent shrines to both deities can be found throughout the island. In Toa Payoh, there is a big banyan tree wrapped in yellow cloth dedicated to Kuan Yin Bodhisattva. But the original deity that was said to have manifested there was a Bawianese Datuk Gong. However, there happens to be a split in terms of what the deities were charged with protecting. While both deities have been the product of the flows of people and belief systems around the peninsula, the deities, once installed, take on very different charges that pertain to their place of belonging. Those who have stationed on mainland Singapore were charged with the task of governing the well-being of its denizens and devotees from inland threats, whereas those on islands were understood to be the patron guardians of ships that travelled along the maritime routes that Singapore was plugged into since the 19th century at least. As a final note for discussion, why does the worship of both deities remain ubiquitous and increasingly urbanized in the landscape of Singapore? While true answers evade historians, we can afford to postulate. Earlier on, we have indentured Chinese labourers who brought about their belief systems to Southeast Asia with them. Today, the worship of both deities have taken an appeal to the needs and interests of the working classes, where people come into contact with elements such as in bus interchanges and hawkers, showing that Singapore still has a place to offer for the presence and worship of deities even in our truly secular society.